is, because strength is very obvious. It's how much weight you can lift, it's how much force you can generate, but different people have different definitions of what conditioning even is. So I want to talk about how I view conditioning and how I see it as being different from fitness itself. This is a really important place to start. Next, I want to talk about the most important pieces that every winning conditioning program must have. Now, to some people, winning is going to be winning a championship, a world championship. To other people, it's going to be making the varsity team as a high school athlete. And to other people, winning just means living a long, healthy life free of disease. So this is not going to be a course just on athletic performance. We're going to talk about the big gamut of conditioning and where it falls into place into different goals, regardless of the type of people that you're working with. Now, I'm going to also go over my top strategies, just the big picture strategies here to test, assess, program, and monitor conditioning programs, again, for every type of goal. Now, if you have questions throughout this, you can feel free to enter them into the question box. If I can get to them by the end of the course, I certainly will do that. And if not, I do get the emails, and I will go through and answer every question via email afterwards. So, again, welcome to this, and let's get started. And the way that I really want to do that is by giving you a little bit of background on just my coaching story so you know where I'm coming from. Because like a lot of coaches, I started out on the strength side of strength conditioning. I worked at the University of Washington, spent some time at the Seattle Seahawks interning, and I was focused on strength. It wasn't until this guy, an athlete named Ivan Salavari, walked into my gym all the way back in 2003 and asked me if I could train him for a K1 fight. Now, I was a fairly new gym owner. I was 23 years old. So, of course, I said, yeah, absolutely, I can train you for a K1 fight. And then I went to my office and I Googled, what is K1? And K1 is a kickboxing organization, but I knew next to nothing about combat athletes. And I knew nothing about training combat sports because my idea of conditioning was really limited to running sprints and gassers. But very quickly I learned I had a whole other side of my coaching game that was lacking because I went over and I trained with Ivan in the gym, the MMA gym, to get a better sense of what conditioning and strength looked like to a combat athlete. Now, at the time, I outweighed Ivan by 20, 30 pounds at least, and was much, much stronger than him by all accounts. So I kind of expected, I started rolling with him a little bit. I knew he was highly skilled, obviously, but I thought I'd be able to keep up, at least for a little bit, when training with him. And in short, I got my ass handed to me. All right, Ivan, despite being much weaker, he could barely do a pull-up, absolutely rolled me up like a pretzel, like I was a baby doll, because his conditioning was so much better than mine. And that was really my introduction into what conditioning really is. And it's different for different sports. And it's a lot more than just running some gassers or running some sprints at the end of a practice or a workout. So I dove right in head first into conditioning. I started training athletes in the UFC, Pride, Dream, K1, a bunch of different organizations. And I really wanted to help these guys and female athletes perform at their best, because I felt like if they went into the octagon or ring and they gassed out, that was on me. And the reality is, in team sports, it's a team sport. There's lots of things going on. It's easy to not necessarily be caught up in it. If you make a mistake, maybe no one's going to know it. But in combat sports, if this guy goes out, he misses weight, he gasses out, or whatever the case may be, that's my responsibility. So I dove into conditioning as much as I could to learn that side of the game, to make sure that that would never happen to an athlete I was working with. Now, 2009, fast forward 6 years later, I'd worked with a ton of world champions, lots of different athletes and organizations, and I wrote my first book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning, which you may or may not have read. But at the time, I wrote it for combat athletes, and I was quickly surprised to see coaches and athletes reading it from a wide variety of sports, simply because I talked about how to apply energy system training and conditioning in a systematic, organized way. And that really had been lacking, and still is, in my opinion. And I started 8 weeks out as part of my effort to help educate people, coaches, athletes, really anybody who wanted to understand the conditioning side of the game, and was where I was when I started out, which was lacking in that knowledge because there really wasn't much out there. It was either textbook knowledge or it was just a bunch of old school training. There really was not a systematic approach. Now, 2011, I launched one of the first HRV apps. I'll talk about HRV a little bit, but it's a tool I've used really since the earliest days of coaching, and it's hugely valuable because it allows you to measure recovery on one hand, but also gives you a very good gauge of overall work capacity, aerobic fitness, and it's just a good general predictor of conditioning. So I launched an app in 2011 to help people learn more about what HRV was and use it as a tool in their training the way I'd been doing for so many years with Ivan and really every other athlete that I'd trained. Now, 2013, I was in Demetrius Johnson's corner and won his first title in the UFC, and he went on to run the title, I believe 13 times, something like that, and set the UFC record for most title defenses. And it was really cool to see the culmination of DJ's career, because he came into our gym as a high school athlete, really just that was his only background as a high school wrestler, and really has become what I would consider one of the greatest combat athletes in mixed martial arts of all time, hands down. 2015, I wanted to take all the stuff that I had learned, from 2003 all the way to 2015, 12 years of training, not just combat athletes, but team sport athletes, tactical athletes, people that just want to live longer, healthier lives, and put it into a course for coaches to really dig into this in the same level I had and learn how to write conditioning programs. So what I'm going to go through, and the rest of this is a taste of what's in the certification and how I approach conditioning. Last but definitely not least, 2018, again, I took all the information I gathered over the years and evolved BioForce HRV into what's called Morpheus, which is a conditioning platform, heart rate training platform that uses recovery to help people improve their conditioning. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But again, the reason I dive into this whole story is simply because my coaching process has really been a journey that's taken me from the far end of the strength spectrum. My first mentor was a guy named Bill Gillespie, benched over 1,000 pounds recently at 60 plus years old. And Bill is the strongest SOB out there. But that was where I started. And again, I knew very little about conditioning. And it was really just across my career of working with these athletes, these combat athletes and other team sport athletes, that I really had to understand the conditioning game. Because again, my responsibility was to help them prepare for competition, and I never wanted to be the reason they lost. So if you're watching this, if you're a coach, I assume it's because you realize that maybe you don't know as much about conditioning as you want to either, and that's okay, because you can always learn more. And the biggest part of being a better coach, of having a career that's successful, is always being willing to learn, and I assume, again, that's why you're here doing that. So let's talk about fitness versus conditioning to kick things off. Now, when I think about fitness, and again, different people have different definitions of all these things, but it's important that we're on the same page so we can speak the same language when we talk about different elements of training. So when I think about fitness, I think about different measures that we can look at in the body, and these create the potential for performance. And what I'm talking about here, things like VO2 max, resting heart rate, different gauges of strength or heart rate variability. We can look at different markers like the anaerobic threshold. We can look at explosive power. All right, these are all markers of fitness. But we all know that people with the best numbers on the paper don't always translate into the best athletes or performers on the field, because these fitness qualities are what we're training, but they don't necessarily automatically translate into performance in the field or in life. And that's ultimately, to me, what conditioning is. It's the application. It's being able to use those fitness skills and tools you have to accomplish a specific goal. Again, whether that's to make a varsity team, to win a world title, or to just avoid diseases and live a healthy life full of energy. So if we think about it this way, I like to think about it as fitness is having all the things you need to build a house. So you have the drywall, you have all the wood, you have the hammer, the tools, the nails. You have all the things that you need to build a house. But if you don't know how to build a house, those tools and those construction materials aren't going to do you a whole lot of good. They're just going to sit there going unused, or you're going to build a shitty house. So again, conditioning is the application, all right? It's taking the fitness skills, qualities, and properties that you have developed inside your body from a physiological standpoint and applying it towards a specific goal. Being able to use your fitness to do something is really the easiest way to think about conditioning. And we look at conditioning that way, it really makes it more understandable how we are trying to develop things. We want to build these tools, but we want to make sure that people know how to use these tools to accomplish whatever it is they're trying to accomplish, all right? And we'll talk about that from a couple of different perspectives, all right? The first one is performance. When we look at performance, we can break it down into three different categories, all right? The first one is power output. And to me, my role as a strength conditioning coach is to help that athlete generate as much power from start to finish of any sort of competitive opportunity, competition. And that's really what fitness and conditioning is all about. It's making sure the athlete can generate power. And of course, injury prevention and movement and mobility, all of those things are a part of power output, not just one, but all of them put together. The second thing that comes down to performance is someone's level of technical skill. Obviously, a higher level athlete has a higher level of technical skill. That's common sense. But this is where the technical development comes in. So when the combat athletes are training, I'm not teaching them technical skills. I'm just making sure they can generate the power they need to use those technical skills. And last but definitely not least is the tactics and strategies. And again, this is tactical preparation. This is, again, the skill coach. But the reality is all three of these things have to work together. So in order to implement a specific tactic or strategy, they need to have a certain level of skill in order to execute that. But in order to execute their skills, they have to be able to generate power from start to finish of a competition. And really, we look at athletes whose power output slows down. In other words, they fatigue. We say, well, that athlete wasn't very well conditioned. So we generally look at conditioning from a power output standpoint. And we look at that, can they sustain the level of power output they need to execute their skills from the start of competition to the end of the competition? And that encapsulates multiple different things, but that's the easiest way to think about conditioning on the performance end. Now we look at conditioning for health span. Often what we're talking about is the metabolic aspect of conditioning. And I wanted to share this paper with you because it's really important to understand that metabolic conditioning is a huge piece of health span. Now, strength, all those things are as well. But this was a paper where they looked at different levels of exercise capacity, in this case, metabolic equivalents or METs, similar to VO2 max, but a bit different. And then they looked at people's overall longevity. In other words, their relative risk of death, which is basically longevity. And they also looked at heart rate recovery, which is directly related to metabolic fitness and conditioning versus someone's relative risk of death. Now you can see here they basically group people into 5 different categories of fitness based on where they fell in these specific tests. It's pretty clear to see that the people on the far end of the spectrum that had the highest level of, the highest risk of death had the worst fitness by far, and the people at the highest metabolic fitness on the far right had 5-6 times lower overall relative risk of death, simply because cardiovascular health, stroke, disease, all these things are related in large part back to metabolic function, how someone's mitochondrial functions, how their overall cardiovascular system and pulmonary system functions. These are huge keys to living a long, healthy life. And so if you develop these things effectively through training, you're going to help somebody live a longer, healthier life, free of disease, where they have the energy, the mobility to do the things they want to do in life, to just enjoy their life. So for most people, again, they want to look good, they want to feel good, but they want to be able to live longer and they want to be able to do the things they enjoy doing. Now, athletes obviously have a very specific goal, but your average clients who are coming to the gym, this is what they want. Look good in a bikini or a bathing suit, feel their best, have the energy they need, stay healthy, all these sorts of things. And a conditioning program is a key part to both of those goals, whether it's the athletic population or the Gen Pop client who just wants to, again, look good and feel good. So this brings me to my model of conditioning. I call it the M3 model. And this is what I developed over many years of writing conditioning programs and digging into the science, the application, and just getting experience. So the first one is where I started, and it's largely what Ultimate MMA Conditioning is about, and that's metabolic systems. So I'll talk a bit about that. Metabolic systems are hugely important, and I used to think that was the only aspect of conditioning. But the reality is it's not. It's a big piece of it, but it's definitely not the only piece. All right, another big piece of it is the mental performance. And this doesn't mean mental toughness or how far someone can push themselves. Sure, that's a part of it. But this means the totality of being able to control your energy output, being able to manage yourself in stressful situations, being able to deal with your environment, keeping yourself calm and composed. This is a mental game, conditioning often is. And it's being able to use your energy wisely that's often a difference between somebody who's going to be effective with it, their energy, and somebody who's not. And has to be a part of training. You can't ignore this step. It doesn't mean you're a sports psychologist, but you can train this element through specific conditioning work as well as just the energy systems. And then last, but certainly not least, is movement capacity. All right, at the end of the day, we move because we're designed to move. Everything about our body is designed for movement, and energy systems are driving that movement, and the mental performance is how we coordinate all that and decide how much energy to produce in a given situation. So it's all of these things, again, metabolic systems, mental performance, and movement capacity that are all driving conditioning, whether it's the athlete contending for a world title or it's somebody who just wants to live a long, healthy life. It's all these things coming together that derive their skill, even if that skill is just, again, surviving everyday life and getting through the stress of life and coming out the other side better for it. So having said all that, having dug into the basics of what conditioning is and the 3 major pieces that drive it, let's get started. Let's dive into, I should say, the 5 keys to writing winning conditioning programs. And again, these keys don't matter It doesn't matter what your goals are, what the person you're training's goals are. These are the keys to train any type of conditioning program, and really any program for that matter. So let's talk about them. First and foremost, you have to have some sort of test and assessment, because I don't care if you're writing a conditioning program, a strength program, a fat loss program, a bodybuilding program, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to identify the areas where someone needs the most work, because these are the areas you're going to target first, because they have the greatest room for improvement and you need to improve them. Now, if you're talking about a couch potato, it's very obvious. Everything is low, so you can start with everything. But for most people, there's going to come a point in training fairly early on where they start to develop areas that are the lagging, that they have the most trouble developing. And generally speaking, if you don't train these, they're going to become weaknesses that become limitations. So my philosophy is always to maximize someone's strengths by minimizing someone's weaknesses. And this is particularly true in athletic populations. If someone's weaknesses inhibit them and prevent them from using their strengths, well, then their strengths aren't going to do them much good. So every program starts with a test and an assessment. Now, on the strength side, people generally know how to do this, but the conditioning side, people often struggle because there's been very little clear definitions how to assess it. So I'll talk about that as we go through this. Next up is you have to build a weekly schedule, a training plan that's going to help someone improve their conditioning and at a bare minimum, maintain their strength. And this means you have to be able to look at periodization across a training week. You have to have some flexibility and adaptability in there to meet people where they are. I've seen a lot of coaches, unfortunately, write these great looking programs on paper, but the reality is if the athlete or the person they're training just isn't going to follow it because they just don't have the time in the day, or they don't have the motivation to train 6 days a week, or whatever the case may be, it's not going to do them a whole lot of good. So you really have to meet people at the level they're at, and you have to improve them gradually over time. So I'll talk about more how to do this, but I always make sure that I build a schedule that's both effective and practical. In other words, the person I'm writing a program for can actually do it. And it's also got to be adaptable, so I'll talk about that as well. The third thing is when you write conditioning programs, you need to have training methods in mind. When you're an inexperienced coach or you're just kind of getting started, you tend to think of programs as just exercises, right? It's just a series of exercises. But the reality is I could do squats 10 different ways and I could get 10 different metabolic adaptations, 10 different neuromuscular adaptations, and 10 different types of results. It's the methodology. It's how we are performing these exercises and movements that ultimately dictates what's going to happen afterwards. So we want to create our workouts within our weekly schedule using specific methodology. And this is really what I focused on in Ultimate Conditioning, and why I think so many different people read it and enjoyed it and applied it, is I focused on different conditioning methods to achieve different types of effects. So you've got to have methods behind your madness. You can't just think of conditioning or even strength training or whatever. It's just exercises upon exercises. Exercises just dictate how the body is moving and what pattern, but it's ultimately the way that it's moving, how it's being loaded, the sets, the reps, the volume, the intensity, the tempo, the methodology. Those are the things that really matter, because those are what drive your physiology. Number 4 here is focusing on recovery. The reality is metabolic training and overall conditioning work, it takes a fair amount of volume. You're not going to improve it for most people 1 or 2 days a week of training. It needs to be trained consistently, and of course you have to train other elements of fitness. So if you don't allow someone to recover, they're ultimately not going to progress very quickly, and they're of course more likely to hit overtraining, get injured, all these sorts of things. And this is why I see a lot of people say, oh, well, my conditioning sucks because if I train it too much, I'm going to lose strength, I'm going to lose muscle, I'm going to blah, 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 blah. The reality is it's because they're training too much volume. They're trying to put a whole conditioning program on top of a whole strength and explosive power program on top of a speed program, and they just can't recover from it. So you have to focus on recovery as part of any conditioning program, and that's where HRV that I mentioned earlier can play such a crucial role. And you have to have a personal element of recovery here. So I'm going to talk more about that. And then last but definitely not least here, number 5 is progression. Okay, this is where strength training, again, it's sort of obvious. You're trying to add sets and reps and weight in the bar. And so progression is very simple. But where people aren't quite sure is how to progress conditioning programs. And that comes down to how you write the program in the first place. If your conditioning program is just run a bunch of intervals at the end of a workout, well, how the hell do you progress that? Just do a few more intervals? I mean, maybe, but you have to write a program for conditioning in order to progress it. You can't just, again, think of a conditioning program as spend 10 minutes at the end of every workout doing, a finisher or doing a sled or whatever. That's not a conditioning program. That's a conditioning exercise. I'm not saying there's no value in that, but that's really only going to help someone increase their conditioning so far. So you have to be a bit more methodical, which I'll talk about how to do here. So these are the 5 things that every winning conditioning program's got to have. All right, it's got to start with a test and assessment. You've got to have a weekly schedule that's both effective and practical. You have to build your program on the foundation of training methods. You have to be able to allow people and focus on recovery throughout, and you have to have progression. If you don't have these 5 elements, people's conditioning is going to get stuck. Okay, it might improve for a little bit, but it's going to get stuck. It's not going to improve over time very long because it needs all of these factors working together in order to allow someone to continually improve and adapt over time and ultimately reach their goals. So let me dig into each of these a little bit more to give you an example. All right, so when we get into testing, remember, it starts with test and assessment. When we talk about testing, most people look at all these different areas and they think they're all separate, but they're not. Okay, every type of test, for the most part, is really looking at just different aspects of movement. So when I look at test and assessment, I start with this fitness profile. I look at someone's height, their weight. You can do body fat assessments, anaerobic threshold, VO2 max. Again, these are just profile markers that are going to govern the nature and limitations of their movement. Somebody who's 6'5" and 300 pounds is a lineman in the NFL, their movement and their energy production is going to be a whole lot different than somebody who is 5'6", 140 pounds. So having just a basic profile of where someone's at physiologically speaking, size, height, weight, body fat, is going to be a big thing from a starting standpoint and understanding where someone's at. And you'll also find, especially if you're talking about sports, different athletes at different positions need to fall in certain profiles to be successful. All right, there's a reason that most successful athletes within a given position of sport have somewhat similar physical characteristics. And if you're talking about training athletes and teams, this is something you want to work with over time, is understanding their successful athletic profile. And I did that for years and years with combat sports and other sports. I took profile of all these different measurements and I built basically a database to understand where the norms were, what was good, what was bad, and that helped me profile the athletes to understand the starting point. Next up is, how does someone move from a low threshold? This means low force, low velocity, low explosive power, all these sorts of things. This is where we look at how does somebody breathe, what sort of body weight mobility do they have, and overall screen for mobility screen is kind of what falls in this category. But ultimately, we're just trying to evaluate how does somebody move under low loads, because whether it's a general pop client or it's an athlete, the majority of our daily lives, we're moving in low load situations. We're not sprinting from place to place. We're walking from place to place. We're not exploding out of a chair when we get up from our desk. We're gradually sitting up and standing up. Like, we don't move explosively under high loads the majority of the time. We don't breathe at very high respiration rates the majority of the time. So there's value in just understanding, how does somebody move? How does somebody cope with the external environment in these low load situations? From there, we want to look at the spectrum, right? We want to look at high threshold movements. And this is explosive movement, strength, squat, deadlift, broad jump, vertical jump, all these things where it's the opposite of low threshold. It's high threshold. It's high muscle fiber activity, high CNS drive, high sympathetic drive. We move differently in these different contexts, and you can't always assume there's a straight carryover. So somebody who has a very good body weight squat, for example, doesn't always have a very good max squat, and vice versa. Just because someone can squat heavy load on the bar doesn't mean their body weight squat is very good. And it doesn't necessarily mean that training one is automatically going to carry over to the other. So this is how we think about testing, is looking across this movement spectrum. Now we talk about conditioning, we can look at 2 different elements. For just general population, gen pop clients, I like to look at a big picture of cardiovascular fitness, predominantly from the aerobic side, because this is what's going to drive the majority of their health and wellness. So we can start with like a 1.5 mile run or a 12-minute run or bike. This is essentially a Cooper's test, but we want to look at how much power they can generate across this time period, because this is a good measure of aerobic power. We can look at their heart rate variability. We look at 60-second heart rate recovery, which was, again, showing that test much earlier to correlate very, very well with life expectancy. We can look at average heart rate. But for your Gen Pop client, this is going to give you a very good starting point or profile of what someone is coming to the table with. If their resting heart rate is 50, that's a much different story than if coming to you with a resting heart rate of 70. If they can't even go for 12 minutes, that's a much different picture than someone who's performing at a high level and already has a relatively good aerobic base. So this will give you, again, a starting point of where someone is metabolically speaking, but of course, the movement and everything else factors into that. Then we can look at specific conditioning for athletes. Really, this just comes down to a sport-specific assessment or watching them play a game or practice. Now, in the combat athletes, what I would do is put heart rate monitors on the athletes as they're going through their sparring sessions. I'd look at their heart rate recovery. I'd look at their average heart rate, how these things interplayed over multiple rounds, and that was how I measured their specific conditioning. Now, I started with the general fitness, but I always measured their actual sport-specific heart rates to get an idea of what was happening as they tried to, again, apply their skills. So from this big picture of testing, again, you don't have to get bogged down. You don't have to do a zillion tests. You just have to figure out for each sport or each particular goal, which tests are the most important, right? And here's a way to look at this. If you don't plan to use the information from a test, it's probably not going to be very important to do it. So never do a test or assessment that's not actually going to help you make better decisions. Because at the end of the day, all of these tests, their only role is to help you understand how to write a more effective program for that person. Don't ever do a test just to write a number down on a page. It's a waste of time for yourself, the athlete, the person training, everything else. The numbers you collect should be about helping you, again, be a more effective coach, write a more effective program. And if that test is not accomplishing that, then don't do it. And over time, your testing should be narrowed down. The other thing here is training itself should be the test for the most part. These are starting points. These are things, well, I haven't trained this athlete, I'm not familiar with the sport. You test these things and you start with somebody new, but over time, you should be using training as your primary testing tool because that's going to allow you to make the best judgment as you progress what someone needs to continually improve. Now, when we talk about the energy systems, okay, now this is assuming we've done our assessment, we understand where someone's at, we have to understand how energy systems play into performance. And the biggest thing is we have to just start with this recognition that the maximum amount of energy you can produce is related inversely to how long you can produce that energy for. And what I mean by that is there's a trade-off between strength, power, and endurance. And we can see this in the energy systems. So if we look at what's called the anaerobic alactic or creatine phosphate, this is your short-term maximum explosive energy system, right? This is an anaerobic system designed for very short periods of high explosive power. So this is what drives weightlifting, powerlifting, track and field, shot discus, all these sorts of really, really explosive sports. And what do they all have in common? They're very, very short, okay? They're just a few seconds because when you produce maximum force and power and you produce energy as quickly as possible, you can't do it for very long before you have to slow down. If we go down the ladder here, we look at the anaerobic lactic. All right, this is your more intermediate anaerobic system. This is your shorter sprints, like your 100 meter, 200 meter, 400 meter. This is your periods where you go heavy and hard for 20, 30, maybe 40 seconds. And again, these are high levels of force and power, but you fatigue very quickly. And nothing is really more fatiguing than a ton of anaerobic lactic work. This is the definition of fatigue typically, where you're just going all out as hard as you possibly can, 20, 30 seconds, sprinting, grappling, whatever you're doing. This is extremely fatiguing because the anaerobic lactic system was not really designed for you to produce that level of power for long periods of time. And then we look down the spectrum again a little further. We look at sports, team sports in particular, but a lot of sports are combinations of the aerobic system, which we'll talk about second, and that alactic system on the far left. So football, rugby, soccer, hockey, combat sports, majority of sports, and not all of them, are combinations largely of the aerobic and the lactic systems working together. Now, there are times certainly where that lactic system kicks into play, and as it kicks in more and more, you get more and more fatigued. So when we see these athletes gas out, it's largely because they've had to rely too much on that lactic system and really too much on the alactic system as well, and they end up fatiguing as a result. So again, as we progress down the spectrum of power output, what we see is the duration increases only as we reduce the average level of power. And if we go all the way down that spectrum, we look at the endurance sports, right? Endurance sports go for minutes on end, hours on end, days on end to some extent in some sports, so people are crazy. And of course, they don't produce nearly as much force and power as you would see in a team sport or sprint or weightlifting, obviously, but they can go for hours and hours on end. And this ultimately is this trade-off between the force and power you can generate on the far left side of the spectrum versus the endurance it takes on the far right hand of the spectrum. So I go through this because if you're training an athletic population, an athlete in particular, you need to understand where they fall in the spectrum, because you need to understand which energy systems need to be developed in order to see them improve their ultimate performance. So we do that again by looking back at that assessment. So what I talked about earlier, things like resting heart rate variability, 1.5 mile run, these give you a very good gauge of aerobic fitness, aerobic power, and just overall aerobic potential. We can look at things like maximum push-ups, maximum pull-ups to get some more gauge of anaerobic lactic capacity, or muscular endurance, we should say. And then we can look at things like plank and these different sorts of movements to see how people stabilize and what sort of muscular endurance they have to maintain good technique and positioning. So there is no one size fits all. Not every single athlete should have the exact same assessment, but this is a basic starting point I use for most people to get this general broad sense of where their metabolic systems are, in combination with, again, explosive tests or strength tests, depending on the sport. And remember, we take this information and then apply it into writing them a program and making them more effective, because we've identified their limitations and we've identified their strengths. So remember, maximize their strengths by minimizing their weaknesses. And this is also really valuable when it comes to training groups, because that's the question I get asked all the time is, I'm writing conditioning programs for groups of athletes. How do I do that without putting the same program in front of everybody? Well, I break my programs up into either levels, if we're talking about people with very different fitness levels, or specific needs around energy systems, if we're talking about athletes that are all roughly at the same level, but need different types of training. So you simply want to create 2 or 3 versions of programs and group people up into where they need to go, versus just giving everybody on the team or everyone you ever train the exact same program. Using your assessment to put people into these groups is a really effective way to give people some level of individualization without having to write a training program that's different for each and every athlete or person you work with, because again, that can be time consuming or impractical. If you're talking about training 100 football athletes or an entire team across the year, you might not be able to write a program for every single athlete, but you can group people into where they need to be trained and focus on putting people in the right groups using that assessment. All right, so number 2 here, it's building the weekly schedule. This essentially is the starting point of how I write every program. All right, I don't start a training program by just listing out exercises, because again, exercises are the end game here. I start by looking at the big picture of the weekly schedule. Now, I look at the training day as the fundamental building block of a program, and I break my training days into 3 categories of volume and intensity. The first one is I call rebound training. This is a low volume, low intensity. We use it to stimulate blood flow, to promote recovery, and we use it as part of the broader strategy of using different volumes and intensities. This is a step below what I call the stimulation day. All right, this is a moderate intensity or higher intensity but lower volume type of day, where again, we're just upping the level of stress from the rebound day, but we're certainly not going to maximum. And then last but not least is that maximum volume, maximum intensity, what I call a development day. You can call it where you want, high, medium, low, whatever you want to call them. We're trying to modulate volume and intensity across a week effectively, because the last thing that's going to be effective for somebody is high intensity, high volume every day. You can do it for a couple of weeks, maybe you can get away with it a little bit longer than that if you're young, but ultimately that's a strategy that will fail. So we have to have a more unique way of looking at this, and that's by looking at different types of training days to accomplish different things. So a rebound day is going to be an RPE, or rating of perceived exertion, of around 5 to 6. Somebody shouldn't feel like they're killing themselves if they're doing a rebound type workout a day. Stimulation's moderate. Someone should feel like they got a good workout, but again, they're not going to walk out of the session exhausted and feeling like they're going to be sore. Around 7 to 8 RPE. And then of course, your development session or workout day is going to be your hardest, high intensity, highest volume, most fatiguing type of situation where, again, you're expected to feel tired afterwards. That's what the goal is to push the body to its limits. So when we are writing conditioning programs, we need to have these 3 tools in mind. Each one of these I consider a tool to accomplish something different. Either I'm trying to speed up recovery, promote balance with the rebound session, I'm trying to promote a level of maintenance and stimulus on the stimulation, or I'm trying to really push the body to its limits on a development day. And each one of those is important. They all serve a specific purpose in the grand scheme of programming. Now, I won't I don't have time here to dig into every different model here of how to combine these things, but I like to use what I call a train, recover, repeat model. And it's just like it sounds. You train somebody, you let them recover, and you repeat that. And for most people, I use what's called, this is kind of your average Gen Pop clients, what I call the 1-2-3 model. So I'm going to use a stimulation day, or again, moderate volume, high intensity, follow it up with a recovery day, another moderate, then I'm going to their hardest, heaviest day towards the end of the week, and then I'm going to let them recover basically over the weekend. And so it's called 1-2-3 because we get 1 development session, we get 2 stimulation sessions, and we get 3 recovery sessions. Now, if they're working with you 1 or 2 days a week, let's say, you're going to pick, of course, the hardest day where you want them to train, because you want to be there with their, pushing them when they're training the hardest to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. And then on their own, you want to give these things around recovery, which we'll talk about a bit later. So on the lower intensity, the rebound type days, I'm giving them things they can do on their own. I'm not necessarily spending each and every one of the workouts with these people. I'm going to give them things they can do on their own on these blue days or rebound days, and I'm going to do the higher, harder intensity sessions with them to make sure, again, I'm coaching them in the points where they're putting their body under the most load. And again, these days can be arranged in infinite different types of combinations. My goal here is simply to help somebody train, again, load, and then recover. So that's why it's train, recover, repeat. So depending on somebody's schedule, how their weekly days are laid out, when they can come to the gym with you, that's going to dictate how you build these 3 types of training days across this week. And again, conditioning needs frequency. You can't just do twice a week and expect someone's conditioning to improve for very long. And that means incorporate all 3 of these days, and it means making sure they can do conditioning without you, because chances are most people aren't training 4, 5, 6 days a week with you unless they're coming to a group class. But even then, there needs to be this modulation of volume intensity, or they're not going to last very long. Now, for somebody who's a bit higher level fitness to start with, I use what's called a 2-2-2. And the most common way I'll use this is simply with this repetitive model, where I'll do a stimulation, develop, rebound, and then I'll repeat that. And this is a model I use with a wide variety of athletes and people with a reasonable base of it to start with, simply because it's what I would call double loading. Okay, I can load them in 2 separate little microcycles there, or mini loading periods, and I can allow them to recover from both of them. So the 1-2-3 is really just 1 primary period of loading. That's all that's necessary at lower levels. But I want to be able to load somebody twice a week if they're starting from a higher point to start with. Now, again, you can organize these a million different ways depending on somebody's week, as long as you're using these different building blocks of levels and volume intensity, whether you can call it high, medium, low, call it rebound, stimulation, development, however you want to look at it. It's being able to load differing levels of volume intensity in a way that's going to lead to continued improvement and allow somebody to see the results because they've loaded their body, they've allowed themselves to recover, and they've been able to progress as a result. And this is what we're looking for. If we look at data here, this is Dan Hubley, the guy who works for me here. We can look at his HRV pattern across different points of time. We're looking for this dip in HRV during the stress. We're looking at this increase in HRV during the recovery, and we can see this train, recover, repeat pattern happening over time. And this is a really cool thing. When you are looking at data and you're programming in this specific way, you can see these changes happening. You can see the body being loaded with stress, you can watch it go through the recovery process, and you can watch it improve over time. And it's, again, how you use data should be dictated by how you build programs to begin with. All right, so next, use methods. All right, this is number 3 here. Derive the program with methods. So once we've laid out our training days and what we're trying to accomplish, we want to make sure that we are building those days around the training methods, which are going to be at different levels of volume intensity. Now, I categorize my training methods here for you to understand. Blue methods, again, are going to be lower intensity, lower stress, lower volume intensity methods. Green are going to be more moderate, and then red are certainly going to be the highest volume, highest intensity. This makes it really easy when I'm programming. So if I'm doing a development day, I consider that a red day, I'm going to be more inclined to use some red methods here. Now, I'll probably use some green, I might use blue for warm-up, but by and large, if I'm doing a high intensity, hard, heavy day, I'm going to use red methods. If I'm using a recovery, rebound type day, I'm going to use methods more towards the blue side of things. Now, again, it's not a hard and fast, set in stone rule that always applies, but in general, these different methods give me the building blocks of how I'm going to press the body to improve by targeting different energy systems with different sets, different reps, different work intervals, and then ultimately different exercises as a result. So I'm going to send you the sheet afterwards that will give you just this basis of how I use these different types of training methods. You can plug them into your programs, but they'll give you just an idea of how I will target different energy systems and different components of energy systems using different training methods. If you want to learn more, you can take my certification, which I'll talk about at the end of this. But every program is based on methods, and every weekly block is based on volume intensity. So these methods plug into this program based on the way you've built your week. Number 4 here is progression. Progression to me is the difference between doing a bunch of workouts and having an actual program. All right, anybody can make somebody else tired. All right, your job as a coach is not to make somebody tired, it's to make somebody better. Now, obviously that means people will be tired at times. That's fine. That's a byproduct of good training. But your goal is not just make someone tired over and over again. It's gradually make somebody better. And the way that you do that is through progression. So I'll talk about the basic phases here of progressing a conditioning program. So week 1 is just the introductory phase. And just like it sounds, I'm introducing someone to a new program. I don't need a ton of volume and intensity. They've never done this program before. So I can start relatively low. Next is the loading phase. All right, now in a conditioning program, this will be, generally speaking, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer if the athlete or the person's at a higher level of fitness to begin with. And I'm going to break this up into what I call the volume phase, where I'm adding sets, I'm adding reps, I'm maybe adding extra workouts as we go. And then I'm going to go into the intensity phase, or the intensification. This is where I'm increasing their heart rates, I'm decreasing their rest intervals, I'm using methods that are higher intensity, I'm upping the intensity, just like it sounds. I want to always start by building volume, which is work capacity and exposure to whatever it is I'm doing, and then I want to make that thing harder. So first, really simple, do more of it, and then make it harder. It really can be that simple when we're talking about progression. And then an often overlooked piece of progression is stabilization. All right, you can't progress someone vertically to infinity. You have to, at some point, level it off and give their body a chance to adapt and stabilize at that level of fitness. So usually that's 1 to 2, sometimes longer weeks. I'm not really upping anything. I'm just maintaining. I'm allowing their body to get used to this high level of fitness, recover a little bit, and stabilize where they're at. And that really is the last part of the progression of the program. And then I'm going to take some sort of restoration period. This doesn't mean I'm just going to take a week or 2 off. It just means I'm going to make sure they're fully recovered, and this can be part of the last part of the stabilization. These can overlap, and then I'll progress into the next phase of the program, training goal, or whatever it is that they're doing. So again, when you write programs, you can do it in a way where it's really easy to progress. Adding sets, reps, is not that difficult. Increasing heart rates, decreasing rest intervals is not that difficult if you've built their program around methods, if you've built their program on the foundation I just talked about. But if their program is just a bunch of workouts that are disconnected, there's no volume intensity management, there's no methodology behind it, then progression just becomes training harder. And you can only train harder for so long. That's not a method of progression. It's not just, well, go a little bit harder next time. That's not going to work for very long. So your ability to progress your workouts starts by writing effective programs to begin with. And really, this is the difference between producing results for somebody for a few weeks and producing results for somebody for months and years on end, and keeping somebody with you all along that time. The fastest way to lose clients is to fail to produce results. Okay, I don't care who they are or how much they like you or what your personality is. Those things are great, but if they don't see results, ultimately they're going to find somebody who will, or at least try to find somebody who will. So progression is the key to making sure someone's continuing to get better and continuing to come back to you. And ultimately, this comes down to showing them progress. So I'm always looking for progress in every workout. So I'm looking at how their heart rate is changing as they're training. I'm looking at how their heart rate recovery is changing. I'm looking at, can they go a little bit further on some test of endurance? I'm looking at how something feels to them. I'm looking at how their heart rate variability. I'm looking for progress because ultimately I want to make sure that what I'm doing is working. And ultimately, I want them to see that what they're doing is working. So if you're looking at data again here, this is Dan's HRV pattern over a period there from March to August. And you can see this steady progression upward is HRV. That's progress. And you want to show people progress. And the only way you're going to show that to people is to measure it in some capacity and show them that they're getting better. So I use all kinds of in-workout markers, largely around heart rate recovery, number of reps, all these sorts of things can be used to help someone recognize, wait a minute, I am getting better. Not that I feel better, which is important, that's subjective, but objectively, I can see myself getting better. My heart rates are coming down faster. My ability to go on this test is getting better. I'm doing more distance and time each workout. Giving people progress is the most important thing you can do to make sure, again, they continue to come back to you and that you can progress them even more, because the best way to progress is to keep training. So you've got to make sure that you're incorporating some markers of progress as part of progression in your workouts. All right, and then number 5 here to wrap things up is focus on recovery. I talked about earlier, recovery is a big thing these days, and that's a good thing. There's been this emphasis on cryo and sauna and cold plunge and blah, 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 blah. All right, those things are great, but the best recovery starts with effective programming, not just overtrain somebody and then have them go some modalities. It's train somebody effectively and focus on the recovery to start with. Those sorts of things are tools, they're great, but you don't need to build a program around cold plunges every day as a means of mitigating all the overload they have. So you need to manage them by starting with recovery. And that understands that training stress is volume and intensity, and recovery is everything else. It's the sleep, the nutrition, the mental stress, the activity levels, all these things drive recovery. So based on the training stress and amount of recovery, that dictates this curve here. Right? If we have more recovery, a greater drive of parasympathetic function, we can recover faster from the same level of stress, right? So the more we can drive recovery, the more training stress we can put on somebody, and the more we're going to see them improve. So the easiest way to think about this is somebody's training can only rise to their level of recovery. If you exceed their ability to recover, it's only a matter of time before they get injured, they stop making progress, or they just quit. Because the body is not designed to be chronically overloaded without bad things happening. That's what recovery is for. So remember, recovery is what derives how much stress your body can adapt to without accumulating fatigue. Because it's this accumulation of fatigue, accumulation that sets off a cascade of events that we perceive as injury, overtraining, plateaus, all these sorts of things. So you have to be focused on recovery because that's what dictates how much training that somebody can do, or at least should do. And that's why I built what I call the recover to win model here. And the recover to win model simply means looking at activity in the form of movement, training, nutrition, sleep, and regeneration. All of these are driving recovery, right? All of these are driving someone's HRV. This is the Morpheus platform I talked about here earlier. And this is the coach's view that you can see different clients, people you're working with, and we can look at people's recovery. And if we see people going the wrong direction, then we need to do something about it. So your job as a coach, trainer, whatever it is, your profession may be exactly, physical therapist, whatever, it's to manage stress effectively. And training is a huge piece of that. It's the easiest tool we can modulate, but all the other things outside the gym dictate whether or not our training strategy can be effective. So we have to be focused on this idea of managing recovery. Now, some tools here to accelerate recovery. Obviously, I can't go into each and every one of these in depth, but the biggest thing here is focusing on the big 4. Okay, like I said, sleep, nutrition, mental stress, and activity. If those things aren't dialed in, you can guarantee their recovery is going to be slower and worse. If someone's not getting enough sleep, their nutrition is lacking, they're heavily mentally stressed, their activity is all over the place, it's going to slow down their recovery. So you've got 2 options. You can help them improve those things, or you can mitigate that by reducing the volume intensity that you're putting them under. So again, you can only train up to their level of recovery. When you exceed that, they're going to pay the price. So focus on the big 4, attack where they're lacking the most, and help them improve that while being mindful of your program. The other thing here is incorporate active recovery and regeneration into your programming. So these are things they can do on their own outside the gym without you. I always write these things into their program. I tell them this is a part of your program. This is not some optional thing you get to do. If you want to, this is something that's vital to your program, and I expect you to do it, and it's something that's going to help you get better. And I'll talk about what that looks like. And then this is where I believe HRV and these different fitness tech tools like Morpheus and others, this is where they're most valuable because they can give people awareness. They can give them the tool to see how their sleep is screwing them, how that 3 glasses of red wine last night was not such a good idea, right? They can see the weekend partying, how it crushed them. So giving people tools like HRV is a powerful tool if they see the impact of it. And it's even more powerful when you use a tool like Morpheus and others where you can see the results of your clients. When people know they're accountable and they're going to come in and see you on a Monday or Tuesday and you can see what happened over the weekend, change their behavior. People will make differences in their lifestyle. Not always an easy path. It's not always instantaneous, but this is what technology should be used for. Not just to see a number on a screen or to have a watch that looks cool, but to help people be aware and to help people be accountable, both to themselves and to you as their coach. Now, when it comes to actually programming active recovery, how do we do that? Most of that is just getting low to moderate intensity type of movements into their daily routine, whether it's in the gym without me, at home, in between sessions, all this sort of stuff. This is where you get people walking, hiking, biking, swimming. You get them to spend 10, 15 minutes doing some bodyweight exercises, mobility, breathing work, rebound training like I talked about, stretching, yoga, Pilates, BFR, E-stim. All of these things are about driving blood flow, about driving movement. And this is where active recovery starts with the word active. Now, that doesn't mean you want someone to go out and do 15, 20,000 steps a day in their day off. That's actually largely going to be counterproductive. But you do want people to incorporate these movement strategies, these habits, these breathing strategies. All these things should be a part of their programming. So sure, maybe they only come to see you 2 or 3 days a week, but they need to be doing these sorts of activities on their own the rest of the week if they really want to see progress. And making sure that they can do this in a fun and easy way that they enjoy is going to be the easiest way to get them to actually do it. So if you have someone who loves to hike, well, encourage them to go out and do hikes and report back to you, record their heart rate so you can see it. If you have someone who's got a Peloton at home or some sort of equipment at home, have them do a workout and show you what they did. So part of COVID was everyone got at-home equipment. Make sure they're using it. It's nothing to be, it's not competition to you. You're coaching them. The equipment never can. But getting people to be active and move in dynamic ways and do these things they enjoy is a really, really big part of promoting that recovery, like I said. And really, it's 30 to 45 minutes of these types of movements, sometimes less, sometimes more. 70 to 80% max heart rate. These things shouldn't feel exhausting. They should feel energetic or energized after they do them if they follow these basic principles and guidelines here. Now, I'm also going to send you here a recovery screen. I call it the Recover to Win screen. Essentially, it's just a checklist you can have people go down, or a questionnaire, I should say, where they can rank and rate how they're doing in these different aspects of recovery. And again, if you're going to help them improve these things, it's important to know where they're at. So if they go through the Recover to Win screen, it's a way for you to quickly see, oh, well, this person's sleep is probably not so good, and here's some ways I can help them improve that. Or this person isn't tracking anything, so I really don't know what the hell they're doing, and neither do they. So I'm going to email it to you after this is over. Feel free to use it, modify it, do with what you will. But it's a really valuable tool that I've used with people I've worked with over the years because, again, it gives me a starting point to assess where I can help them the most. All right, so wrapping things up, I think we've gone a little bit over time here, but to put things all together, let's talk about the big three here. The first thing I talked about, and I just actually talked about again, it's always start with an assessment. And if you're not assessing, you're guessing is a common cliche, but there's a lot to be said for that. Because if you don't have any baseline, if you don't know where someone is starting from, and you don't know what they're good at and what they're not good at, it's really hard to write a good program for them because you're just guessing, or you're using the same thing you've used for everybody else. And again, that might work for a little while, but ultimately that's just not a strategy or recipe for long-term success. Build your programming around train, recover, repeat, and use methods and progressions to drive that. This is really the heart and the foundation of effective program writing, of writing these programs that win, whatever that means for the person. It's being able to deliver the right amount of training in the right form at the right time and progress that from week to week and month to month. And that's a skill that takes practice. I'm not going to lie and say you're going to instantly be a genius conditioning program writer. It takes time, all right? It's like anything else. If you want to get good at writing strength programs, you got to write strength programs, and you got to learn and get better at it. If you want to write conditioning programs, the only way to do that is to start writing conditioning programs and get better at it over time. It's a skill set like anything else. And if your goal is to be a successful coach to build a long and successful career and be able to work with anybody from, again, world champion athletes to people that just want to lose a few pounds and be healthier. If you want that mobility, that ability to train anybody for anything and feel confident in your ability to do that, well, it takes developing skill sets around programming. Again, mobility, strength, conditioning, power, all these different things are skill sets that you need to be able to incorporate into your repertoire in your program writing. And then don't neglect recovery. As I said, it's a hugely important piece of this if you want to deliver sustainable results. I talk to coaches all the time. They want business advice. They want to know how to grow their business, and they see conditioning as a tool to that, which it certainly can be. But I often tell them the best way to build your business is to keep your clients for as long as you possibly can. All right, it's not easy getting clients these days. There's a lot of competition. It's not easy if you get someone to buy into you. There's again a lot of options out there, whether it's training at home or training with somebody else or wherever. The reality is you can develop the best long-term relationships with your clients by making sure that they build a effective program that balances the stress of training and the stress of their life with their recovery. That is the only way to achieve long-term success. I don't care who you are, what your goal is. You cannot out-train poor recovery. The person will pay the price, and ultimately, you will pay the price because they won't perform at the level they expected to, and maybe they screwed it up because they didn't sleep, they didn't eat, but they will blame you, or they will ultimately look for another option if nothing else. So again, don't neglect recovery. It's an equally important part of this whole process. It's a part of coaching, and you have to consider it as part of writing winning conditioning programs. All right, so last here, I would wrap things up, I promise, is just if you really want to understand conditioning, the tools are in front of you. I'm going to help you do more of this, but just kind of talk about why I think it's so important is conditioning is what's going to help people live longer lives. It's going to help them feel better about themselves. It's going to help them make the team, win the world titles. Strength and power is obviously a key part of that. I don't want to downplay that. But for me, there's a million coaches out there that can write strength conditioning programs and are fairly effective at it. There are very few coaches who can write really, really good conditioning programs that can transform people's lives and transform people's careers. And this is why I think conditioning is so important. It's helped shape my career. I've been able to help shape the careers of countless people and athletes of all levels, from high school, middle school, all the way up to world champions, and everyday people, again, who just want to come in the gym, feel more energized throughout the day, not have any nagging injuries, and enjoy their ability to live their life. So conditioning is a very powerful thing. That's why I'm passionate about it. That's why I focus on helping people learn how to improve it. And if you want to learn more, I'll just wrap things up by giving you the ability or the opportunity to sign up for my Bioforce Conditioning Certification course. This is really just if your goal is to take your program writing to the next level, to be able to dig into all these different areas I've only be able to kind of scratch the surface of over the course of this class, and you want to dig in and really become an expert at this. And again, I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass and tell you this is going to happen instantly, that you take this course and you're going to be a conditioning expert that's going to rule the world. No, that will take time. But I can help you shortcut years off of the learning game, get to the heart of what actually works, and help you avoid wasting your time on stuff that doesn't, and give you the new tool set to really write effective conditioning programs for anybody, regardless of what their goal may be. So I will send you an email after this that's going to give you all the details about how you can register. Normally, this course opens just twice a year to the public, but I really like to give the people who raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more, I'm interested in becoming a more effective coach. I like to reward that by letting people sign up early and when the public cannot sign up for it. So to say thanks for joining me throughout this period, you've made it this far, I'm going to open it up to you and allow you to register if you'd like to do that. Again, no pressure here, but it is the best course out there. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but it will help you write conditioning programs. There's lots and lots of, there's thousands of coaches from all over the world that have taken it that can attest to that, and I'll share some of their stories with you. So looks like I'm out of time here. I'm sorry, don't have time to dig into questions, but again, if you do have any, feel free to fill out the questions box. These will go to my email, and I will reply to every question I get. So I truly say thanks for spending your time with me. I really hope this has given you a new perspective, hopefully a broader perspective and some context about what conditioning is, why it's so important, and the process that you want to go through in order to write game-changing, winning conditioning programs for anyone. So I'm Joel Jameson. Thanks again. Hope to talk to you again real soon.